Integrating your app with external databases can be a great option when you want to work with already existing data. In Aquro, we've made working with SQL databases both easy and secure. Once you've configured a database connection, your app will be able to access your data via our backend service. Only the specific tables you would like to expose will be exposed to your app, and your credentials are never shared with your app users. In this video, we'll configure a database connection and then use it to both view data from a database table and list it in our app. With that said, let's get started by first heading over to the database connection service and adding a new database connection. Right-click in the Tree View menu and select Add New Database Connection. Give your database connection a name and then click Save. Now you'll need to type in the database connection details that the service will use to access the database. Please note that this information will never be shared directly with your app. Your credentials will only be stored in our backend service, and the database connection will only be made from our servers. When I've typed in all the information, I'll click Verify Connection to verify my connection details. Once the connection is verified, a list of tables in my database will be listed. I can explore the content of the table by clicking on the magnifier icon. To be able to work with the data from this table in our app, we'll now need to add a data model in our app that matches the content in the database table. This is done to make it possible to map which data in our app is related to which data in the database. To add a new data model to our app for this table, head over to the Data Models area and add the model. I'll call this model Contact Model, and add the 3 fields we have in our database: first name, last name, and email. When I'm done, I'll save the model and then I'll head back to the development area to continue setting up our database connection. Now, I can begin configuring how the contacts table of our database should be exposed to our app. First, I can select which action should be allowed for the app to perform to this table. In this example, I would like the app to be able to view the data from the table and also give it the option to insert new data into the table. Therefore, I'm activating these features by simply clicking their toggle buttons. As a last step before we can start using this table in our app, I need to map this table to the data model we just created. I'll do this by clicking the pen icon. On the left side of this window are all the fields from the database, and on the right side are all of the data models in my app. To map this database table to the model we've just created, first select the contact model from the dropdown. Now, I'll simply need to map the fields from the database table to the fields in this data model by dragging the fields from the left list and dropping them to the fields in the right list. By doing this, our table is fully configured and ready to be used in our app. One important thing to point out at this stage is that the data is still not synchronized into the app. The steps we've taken until now have only been configuration of the database service, preparing the data to be ready to be accessed by our app. Therefore, our next steps will be to load the data from our database service to a local data collection in the app. Once we've loaded the data into our local data collection, we can use this as any other data collection in our app. But before we can load the data from the database service, we'll need to configure a local data collection that can be used to temporarily store the data. To do this, we'll need to create a new data collection in our app. As we've talked about in previous videos about data that will be used by multiple pages of your app should be added to the master page so that they load automatically when any other page loads. Let's head over to the master page, then go to the Data tab. To add a new collection to this page, go ahead and click Add. Select New Data Collection, then select the Contact model. As we would like to use this data on multiple pages in our app, I'll select Global as the scope of this data collection. As this data is stored in an external database, we do not need to save the data to the in-app database. We'll only use this collection to temporarily store data that's loaded from the external database, so we'll select that it's a temporary collection. Finally, I'll give this collection a name. I'm going to use Contacts. Now I can save the master page. With that all configured, our external database data is now ready to be used in any way we see fit by our app. Go ahead and head over to the home page and add a list view component here. As list items, I'll choose the data collection we just created, as this collection will be loaded with the items from our database, just as we want. Now it's time to just map the fields from the collection to the list component so that it can display the information we'd like. I'll map the first name to text 1, last name to text 2, and email to text 3. Finally, we need to call our database collection service to load the data to the collection and fill our list with the items. To do this, I'll head over to the Scripts tab and edit the visual coding script that's set to load after loading the event. This script will be executed once the page is ready, and this is a great place to add a call to the database service to load our data. To call our database connection service, I'll use the Cloud DBC table view coding block. I'll connect it with the start block, and now I set the database argument to external database, which is the database connection we created at the beginning of this video. I'll set the table argument to contacts, and I'll also map the items return property to the contacts collection we just created. Once the data has been loaded into the contacts collection, the items are ready to be listed out in our list view. The only thing we have to do is make sure that this new data is loaded to the page and then refresh the list view with these items. Begin by refreshing the loaded data by using the data refresh loaded coding block. And finally, we'll use the UI component reload block to reload the list view itself. By doing this, our script is complete and we should now have a working integration to our database in place. Go ahead and close the visual coding window and save the page. If we've done everything correctly, the list with the items from our database should now be loaded directly into our list view component, and it should be displaying them now. Boom, there we go. Now there were quite some steps there, so let's go ahead and wrap up this video by summarizing everything we've done to help you get a more concrete understanding. First, we configured the database connection service to connect to our external database. Then, we created a data model in our app that contains the same fields as the database table in our external database we connected to. Once the data model was in place, we mapped the fields from the database table into this data model. This was done to tell the backend service how the data inside our app was configured. When that was set up, we moved over to our app and created a local data collection. This collection is the place where we have our data items inside the actual app itself. And as a last step, we used a visual coding script to call the database connection service to load the data from the external database into our local data collection. It can be a lot to take in, but after you've given it a try and run through this a time or two yourself, it actually becomes fairly simple and you'll get the hang of it. In the next video, we'll continue to work with the same database connection, but this time around we'll be helping our app insert new items into that database. We'll see you in the next video.